we are going to get ready for our keynote speaker. So I'm guessing, do we have John on the line? There's John. So
Good morning.
good morning, John. Excited to have you here. And so I'm not going to go into a long, lengthy description of John and his bio. You have all that information. So I feel, please feel free to read that again and to reach out to John if you have any questions. But I think we're going to just jump in. Are you ready?
We're ready.
Perfect. Thanks, John. So John, you've been really doing some great work in both policy development and practice over these last few years. So can you really just start us off this morning by telling us what brought you to rural education, right? And specifically this policy space, and talk more about the work that you're currently involved in.
Sure, absolutely. So sometimes my friends ask me the same question. And, I really feel like my life and my work has come full circle. I grew up in a little town called Huntingtown in southern Maryland in Calvert County. And at the time, it was one long road, Route 4, with Calvert High School at one end and Northern High School at the other. Not much in between other than farms and tobacco. And you had to drive quite a distance to get anywhere and to do much of anything. So it was a rural place. As I knew it. I mean, rural is different depending on where you live and what your experience is. It's changed like many rural areas. I'm sure the locale codes have changed because it's now a bedroom community to Washington, D.C., more or less. And I can tell you that when I first got to the U.S. Department of Education, it became an education for me and for many of the people that I came in contact with there. So what brought me to education policy and rural education is when I did have that opportunity. I had worked as a newspaper reporter. I had worked in suburban and urban school districts. I grew up in the country, we called it. But when I got to the department, I was extremely lucky in that Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, recognized he was the longest serving big city superintendent. And he said, John, we got to figure this out because he didn't know, he didn't have all the answers, and he readily admitted that. And so we started that journey. And I think I visited about 42 states in 4.5 years. Visited a lot of colleges, schools, communities, and no place was the same. Some of them had similar challenges, and there certainly were opportunities, but no place was the same. And we couldn't be prescriptive and tailor one policy to meet everyone's needs. And I think that's a big point to make as we move into this next administration, this new administration. There will be a period when the field needs to help the new administration, needs to educate the new administration on what those differences are, what those challenges are, and where those opportunities exist. Because there are a lot of preconceived notions about rural areas that frankly have changed and are not true anymore, or at least are very different. So I try to think about that in my work today. So I do some consulting. I work with school districts, colleges, education nonprofits in different parts of the country. I'm supporting the Comprehensive Center in Region 5, which is West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. And the thinking that when I work with them is the same. No state is the same. No community is the same. But there are ways to collaborate and overcome some of those common challenges. So, and communication is a big piece of it too. I know most of your audience is probably community college presidents and representatives. but I talked with a person in administration and admissions at Bluefield College in West Virginia recently, and they are actually seeing an increase in enrollment. And so I asked him, what do you attribute that to? And he said the new president really made a concerted effort to focus on outreach and to pursue the students that institution was intended to serve. And so that has made a huge difference for them. They're actually building housing on campus to accommodate that increase in enrollment. And again, I know that's not happening everywhere, but I think there are little things we can learn from each institution, whether it's a community college, a college or university, or a partner that we're all working with.
Yeah, thanks for John. Thank you for that, John. And I just want to remind our audience to put some questions in the chat if you have, as John. And so we'll go through this, and as they come up, we might add some audience questions as well, if that's all right with you, John.
Sure.
But building on what you just said, it's really interesting because there has been a lot of press, right? In regards to really declining number of learners enrolling in the community college, right? And so then the COVID-19 pandemic has even, exacerbated, right, that issue for our rural community colleges. So thinking about the example you just gave, like what advice might you give to our partner institutions, on strategies for re-engagement of not just those traditional, right, these traditional learners that we've talked about that are coming directly from the secondary side, but what about the other non-traditional learners or the community members? At the lab, we like to call them sort of the new majority, right? Because these are the new majority learners. So, what strategies or advice might you give, when it comes to the re-engagement of those community members into this education space?
Sure. So I like that you wove in sort of the media coverage of rural America, of community college enrollment, and et cetera. There's a story on the front of a website called the Hechinger Report this morning about community college enrollment taking a dive. And I thought it was interesting that they didn't once reference rural community colleges. So, but I think it's important because many reporters that I speak with on a regular basis are now doing more. They're more interested in covering rural communities, rural colleges and schools, because it's new to them. It's something they can learn about and get excited about. And believe it or not, even the ones I work with have periodically put messages out on Twitter that said, why can't I find someone to serve on a conference panel on these topics? And I just shoot right back at them. Do you have a rural voice? And it's something that I think over the last 5 to 7 years, the media has gained interest in, and there's a whole lot we can do to tell this story in a more broad way. And when you talk about engaging students, engaging adult education candidates, we need to get these stories out there. We need to tell the information that they need. For example, financial aid is available to adult learners, and Pell Grants are the major way to reach students who need financial aid, and we need to keep investing in Pell Grants to serve as an economic development tool for rural areas. And I think the more that we can do to tell this story and to work with partners who work with the people we want to reach, the more successful we'll be.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting. And, and I think as also somebody that is still living rural, sometimes we see that media attention and we don't hear our voices, right? And we hear this, it's coming from somewhere else. And so I think it's so important. It's how can we embed ourselves in these conversations, and how can we really get our local media involved, but also get it out to this national, the national public and the national media. I think it's interesting. And yeah, we have seen such an increased attention on rural America, right, in the last few years. And so, in your opinion, what has this increased attention, like what has it brought when it comes to additional resources and opportunities? Like, where are the places sort of that, like you talked about, are sort of hot and ready, right, to strike when it comes to this? And then, where are there still gaps that we need to, again, weave into that story to ensure our learners and communities are supported?
So I'll take your first sentence first. Not enough has been done. I would say less than we think. There was a great expectation for investment in rural areas and rural communities, 4 or 5 years ago, and to a large extent that did never materialized. Now, I will say there is an exception to that. We are doing more to close the broadband gap, which is extremely encouraging. There's more we can do, whether it's with TV white space, other efforts to get states to do more to invest in building out their broadband infrastructure and updating connectivity. There's a whole lot more we can do, but not enough has been done, is the answer to the first piece of your question. And when it comes to sort of the strategies that seem to have really worked well, it's about partnerships. It's about every partnership you can think of, from K-12 to community college to technical colleges. How can community and technical colleges work with land grant institutions in order to build down into K-12? How can we work with education service agencies, bring them into this mix? I'm familiar with the Appalachian Collaborative, and they've done a great job out there with their P20 Council to connect those dots. And there's so much more we can do to connect those dots, and we really need to when it comes to reaching adult learners in particular, because they're busy trying to feed their families and put their own children through school. They don't know. I can tell you that many adults probably don't know what a FAFSA is. And if they do, it's a daunting challenge to go through that and try and figure out, am I doing it correctly? Hopefully, if we do it correctly, we're inviting them in for support. And we're inviting them in so that families can pursue education together. And I think partners are the key, because where there might be a gap here, it can be filled by a partner there, whether it's a philanthropic partner, a nonprofit partner. I think of Ohio again, where Battelle for Kids has done so much work. Certainly the community and technical colleges, land grant university, even the privates. I'm thinking of Swarthmore in Pennsylvania, which has fly-in days where they bring rural kids in. I mean, there's a lot of amazing work going on out there. We need to connect those dots better.
Yeah, and I've worked with Andrew at Swarthmore a lot, who's making those, and it's been wonderful to see that community, come together. And I'm glad that you mentioned partnerships. Part of this, we've asked for our institutional teams to bring others from their community into the design process. A lot of times in our work, we have institutional members that are here, but really because we feel like this is a community design and this is a community project, we need those for the community to come in, and specifically thinking about that secondary and post-secondary partnerships, which I know that you've worked a lot with. And so, a question that I had is, as these teams, and we're thinking about the secondary and post-secondary partnership, like what makes these partnerships effective? And perhaps how should we be reimagining what these partnerships look like from what they look like today?
So there's an easy answer to what makes them effective. It's the people involved and the commitment that's made. And there are just so many examples out there where collaboration yields results. We need to do a better job of of illustrating those examples and telling those stories. I think about the University Center of the Mountains in Appalachian, Kentucky, where you have 4 years, you have Hazard Career and Technical College there, you have professors coming in to teach in person or doing it by video. There are so many models out there that we can share and introduce people to that allow rural students, adult students, young students to stay in their community if they want to live and work, to get their education and learn a skill. There's a big, obviously, perception that when kids leave rural communities, they'll never come back, and that's a real concern. And the same for adults. Your community is losing talent if that adult leaves to find work. But if we can do more to make those connections with employers and our colleges, with our high schools and employers, and sort of wrap that service and outreach around regions so that people know what the opportunities are in regions. I've learned recently what a interest inventory is. So, colleges can work with high schools and with each other to create an inventory of the employment opportunities in their region so that adults and young students can see that there are employment opportunities in their region. They haven't seen them or learned about them yet. And perhaps it's an opportunity they want to pursue educationally as well as through employment. I also think about work study. Adults probably don't think about work study, or they believe that they're not eligible for work study. We can tell that story better and show people that there are avenues out there to work, to get their education, to be, leaders in their community, be part of the community that they want to live in. And I just think those partnerships can help fill the gaps, and we can do a better job of telling that story.
Thank you. We do have a question, and it goes back a couple. So, can you tell us more when you talk about the comprehensive center that you're working, and what that means, what that is?
Sure. Well, that's a prime example of, if we throw these words around, we don't explain them, no one knows what we're talking about. So I apologize for that. So a comprehensive center is essentially a technical assistance, capacity building firm, research firm who has received a grant from the U.S. Department of Education to become what is called a comprehensive center. So the comprehensive centers serve state agencies, state education departments, build their capacity, help them help the school districts they work with, help them in partnership with colleges and universities. So the comprehensive center I'm working with, for example, is working with the West Virginia Department of Education and the University of West Virginia on teacher recruitment and retention. Now, I think about 2+2 programs also. I think that's something that should be added to the mix with some of the community colleges in the area and et cetera. So again, there's more that we can do, and comprehensive centers help build that capacity for states to work with their districts.
Interesting. And yes, we could talk about 2+2s all day long, especially with teacher education and the intricacies of what that curriculum looks like for so many different states and so many different institutions just for transfer. So yesterday, right, we saw a new administration take office, and I think we can all agree they took office in what is a very different looking US than it was even 4 years ago. So what do you think, right? So I'm not asking you what you know or but what do you think that this administration, like, what should be their top 2 to 3 priorities, specifically when it comes to rural higher education?
So I thought a lot about this question because obviously I worked in the Obama administration. I'm excited to see what the Biden administration does. And I think one of the things that's really going to be important is not just federal funding, but pushing states to invest in not just higher education, but to support rural serving institutions. Um, Rural serving institutions obviously are critically important to community development, they're economic development anchors, levers for building human capital in rural areas. So I think that's number one. Number two would be continuing to invest, if not increase Pell Grants. They're a huge economic development tool for rural areas, I believe. And they help illustrate the fact that, rural areas are not all the same, and distance increases poverty. So rural areas, Pell Grants are critical to help kids and adults pursue their education and become entrepreneurs, fill the business needs that are in those communities. And then finally, I really believe that more needs to be done to invest in research on rural education. So rural education research at the K-12 and the higher ed level, for sure. It's very thin currently and has always been. So there's more we can do there to actually see what works in different parts of the country.
No, I like that. And I think, we have seen a little bit of increase in that research piece, and I'm really excited to see what the next few years, what it means to actually being able to fund some of that research in different ways as well. So as you talked really about, these priorities, a question that we have, which I think is a great question from the group, is, how can we document and lift up, right, the resiliency and creativities of this cohort of community colleges in ways that actually can be relevant for the policymakers, right, to have them care? How do we tell this story? How, what are some steps, or what can we do within this area?
So there certainly are as many ways to tell the story as there are stories to tell, but I'll give you a few examples. So the Rural Community College Alliance does a real good job of coming to DC for a day or two on Capitol Hill, and they bring college presidents with them, and they meet their representatives. They have heart-to-heart conversations with them a couple times a year. They also invite and host gatherings in other parts of the country. I think once we get through this pandemic, re-engaging in that in-person relationship building, storytelling is going to be critical. But there are many other ways to tell this story also, whether it's through a research project, whether it's having a nonprofit that has mutual interests document and help tell that story. Community colleges, especially smaller colleges, may not have a communications team, but there certainly are local reporters around. And I would encourage community college presidents, administrators to look for opportunities to build those relationships, establish those relationships. If you have the means, hire people to help you with that, so that they get to know what those challenges are, and they learn the questions to ask when they're interviewing and telling this story. There's so many ways to use video these days, and social media on our own. Blogging is is becoming old school now, but any way we can actually get this message out and share it with appropriators at the local, state, and federal level, share it with the media locally, regionally, nationally, share it with the philanthropic community. There's so much more the philanthropic community can do to work in rural areas. Now, you have a great example of how philanthropy can be leveraged to support post-secondary education. But I would say this is the exception. It's not the rule. So it's a very exciting project to me.
Us too. Yeah, thank you. So we've had a couple questions, and I know you touched on it a little bit around broadband. And I know that a lot of your work, before has been in broadband. So regarding rural broadband, do you see a faster, more efficient path to broadband really utilizing state and private partnerships or federal private partnerships?
So I've actually struggled a little bit with this because in my own home state, I've asked questions about broadband of different cooperatives and of the state. And in many cases, they seem to have their plan, they're working their plan, and they're not deviating from their plan. And I get that. There's limited funding. Um, I think we're making slow progress. I think we are closing gaps, but there's so much more to do. And I just wonder how we can use new technologies in different ways. I was talking to uh, the broadband cooperative or collaborative, I should say, on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I asked
Mm.
them. I know somebody who works in the satellite industry, satellite internet, and satellite internet has its limitations, and it probably isn't the right fit everywhere, but they're putting it on Amtrak now
Hmm.
to fill in those gaps as Amtrak sails through the mountains and their Wi-Fi or their internet service on the train ends up having gaps in the service. They're using satellite now to seamlessly fill those gaps. So you never know there's an interruption in the service.
Oh.
So I asked, how can we partner with some of these satellite providers to fill in those gaps on the rural Eastern Shore of Maryland? And there was just no interest. And
Huh.
and I don't get that.
Yeah.
So again, there's more we can do and more relationships we can establish.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. As a Amtrak rider, having Wi-Fi on the train is very important to getting work done as well. And I'm sure for students who are, struggling with trying to complete their secondary high school. I have a high schooler, right? So getting that done during the day. So I have one more question, and then we have some more from the audience. So this project is ambitious. You've talked about it too, right? So we're very, thankful to SNDM, but it's an ambitious project. And really it's a call to action for our rural community colleges to seize this moment, right? And really the current attention that's on rural America. Our goal is really to create models that other rural community colleges can learn from. The colleges that, the institutions that we selected for our first cohort, are here because we believe that they are the innovators that can lead the way. And they've also stepped up to say, we're prepared to work and think differently, which we appreciate. Um, and we talked a little bit about this before, but higher education traditionally does not work across institutions, right? We kind of feel like we're in these bubbles. I come from an admission world, so right, that's a whole different outlook on that. But you know, we believe that working together, we're going to go further. That we have to work together, especially in these rural areas. So, as these institutions are getting ready to embark on this design year, what advice might you give them to think about working across institutions, working with your state leaders, working with your federal leaders to really impact sustainability and the scale that we're hoping to achieve for this project?
So first, I would say, make contact with the four other people in this project working with you so that you can share as you go through this and learn from one another. And then I would say invite people in. Come see what's happening. I think about a project that I had the privilege to go see when I was at the department. It was a distance coaching model, and it was working across 8 different states in schools, and it was was being hosted by the University of Nebraska, or it was anchored by them. And when I asked, I saw it was such a fantastic model. I asked, who have you showed it to? Who knows about this? And the focus was so exclusively on the project that they hadn't invited anyone in to see it. So I think it's so important for us to showcase the work as it goes along, not when it's finished. As it goes along, draw people in so that they become interested in following the work, so that they can see your progress as it unfolds, and so that other people can learn from what you're doing rather than having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. No, I think that that's so important. I think a lot of times, and what, we do at the lab as well as, showing what it's like going along the way, having that conversation, and also where we had to make changes, right? Or to iterate on that, because again, if we wait till that final is anything ever really a final product, right? No, our learners are changing, our community is changing. So we have to be, you know, flexible and be able to change with that. So a
Well,
couple other,
can I
oh, go
just
ahead.
chime in here? You are so
Yes.
right about that. So working with the Comprehensive Center I told you about, they're
Mm,
capacity builders. So just about every one of these projects has changed. There have even been projects that have been scuttled, that have been deleted because it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. But that's okay. We learn as we go, and we can make changes to increase the impact.
definitely. I've never seen a whole solution fail, right? I've seen
Right.
parts, right? But never the whole package. Yeah. So one of a question that we have from Ohio, which talked about, so Ohio Means Internship and Co-ops is a program. I don't know if you've heard about them, through the Ohio Department of Ed. And so the grants, they would reimburse employers, and we talk about this a lot, a portion of their interns or student wages. So do you know of other programs like that really help engage the employers with the schools? Specifically, I think when it comes to, again, helping, paying, we talk about internships, and so many times, they want learners to have experience, but our learners also have to put food on the table. They have to put gas in their cars, right? And so, so are there programs that help really think about the employer and the school engagement piece that you've seen?
So I think there are programs in different parts of the country. Um, I'll give you a couple examples. I don't know if they're exactly what you mean, but when I'm working with Berea College, also
Mm,
in
yeah.
Kentucky, they emphasize to me that service does not have to mean free.
Mm, yeah.
So service can be a paid internship, and it can be the employment opportunity students are looking for. So partnering with um, service providers can help in that area. And then as the project where the grant ends, that service provider can take over the work and continue the work and continue employing students or others. That's one example I've seen. And then um, also in Kentucky, when I was talking about that inventory of opportunities,
Mhm.
in Eastern Kentucky, where in many cases hospitals, government, municipal partners are the employers, we can't forget about them as well. So, local government and municipal partners should be a part of this piece as well.
So we've had some conversations already within, our institutions, and really, and we have some employers with us today that are thinking differently about what work looks like, the future of work, sort of post pandemic, if we ever get post pandemic, or what that looks like when it comes to remote work opportunities. And so is that something else, and how might institutions think, right, about, and talking to even local or national state employers about what remote work could look like for their area?
Oh, absolutely. I think remote work is really going to become innovative as well. Um, in Kentucky, the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, they teach kids, they're teaching students skills like virtual reality. and they're teaching children with disabilities skills like virtual reality so that they can work from home or they can work remotely regardless of their disability to do really high tech, cutting edge work and generate a pretty good income regardless of where they live. And it can change not just their future, it can change the future of their whole family. Considering, like I said, poverty increases with distance, and if we can overcome distance, we can really elevate opportunities for for whole families.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And one of the goals of this is, they're family sustaining jobs, right? Family
Right.
sustaining wages, and what that means. I hear that there's a lot of talk about broadband in the chat, so I'm gonna bring that up too. And there's a question, is there any significant work being done related to broadband access as a public resource, similar to the airwaves and early broadcast TV? Have you heard any of that?
I don't know much in that area,
Mhm.
but certainly I'm watching the whole sort of debate on Capitol Hill with TV white space and how
Mhm.
we can create more opportunities in that area. And I'm hoping that the FCC continues to do more and more over time. I think we have to figure out every opportunity, and every opportunity doesn't have to be. I don't think it has to be expensive. I mean, that's a relative term, of course, but there has to be a space there, a place there that broadband and internet becomes more of a publicly available tool for education, for economic development. Economic development that isn't sustainable without education. So there has to be a way to do that.
um, it's interesting this conversation about broadband, and I will just say, going back a couple of steps around talking, or a couple of questions around media and how we get these stories out. I had someone the other day say, I don't know why online education hasn't just sort of taken care of rural education needs when it comes to higher education. And so again, it's the narrative, right, that there is broadband and that is accessible, and that everybody wants to learn online, right, which I think is a different conversation. And so one of the questions that we just got was, when we talked about working remotely and sort of trends, like, how can our institutions lift up some of the regional opportunities that you mentioned, while also, right, including those trends in working remotely?
So I'm thinking about your last two questions. Number
Yeah.
one, with the broadband and the fact that people are sitting in parking lots trying to teach and trying to learn, and it's not it's not a sustainable solution. It's a
Yeah.
band-aid.
Mhm.
So we do need to do more to increase connectivity at home for more communities. Schools have done a pretty good job. Higher education has done a good job of being anchor institutions. Libraries have done a good job. We need to do more to reach people at home
Mhm.
in as many ways as possible in that area. As far as holding up those examples of what's working, again, this is a marathon. This is not a sprint, and there will be more and more opportunities to tell that story in more and more places, whether it's in state capitals, whether it's in county facilities. Commissioners need to know, reporters need to know. When you host opportunities like this, it's fantastic. It begins that conversation. And as we come out of the pandemic, we need to take the people who need to see the work so that they can understand more fully than they would in an article or a soundbite.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate talking about, yes, those that are trained to teach right at, in the McDonald's parking lot, because that's where the free Wi-Fi is. And, and they're like, it's working. It's not working. It's, people are doing the things that they have to do to thrive and survive, but that's not necessarily what that means to be working. And you're right, it's not sustainable. And having the conversation about not only bringing that access to them, but what about the infrastructure that they need at home to have three, learners that are in high school or college and mom, right, all trying to do this training and education, and how can we support that, as well, I think is going to be a big question.
And can I just add one other piece to all of this? Because in many places, you hear the idea that college isn't for everyone. Well, yes, it is, but we don't do a good job of telling people what college means or what it could mean. I think about when I had the chance to visit Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma, and I learned that the Community College of the Air Force is, probably the largest system in the world. And when you talk to young people, they don't make the connection between military service and college or education. And that's another connection we need to make in new ways, so that people can see that opportunity, young people and adults, who maybe hadn't thought about the fact that if they join the military, they're probably going to be put into a community college to learn a skill. And that's a good thing.
No,
I just want to add that.
I appreciate that. And I definitely agree. And I think, again, even norming the words around college, right? What does that mean to your community? And how can we have those conversations? Well, I know we just have a couple more minutes, and I want to, again, thank you so much for your time. So after, and this is a little teaser for those on the call as well, after this, we're going to go into a breakout session that is focused on helping our institutions, with the help of a lot of other invited guests that we have today, think about as we build up the community of practice. You talked about the Rural Community College Alliance, right? We know that there are state and federal agencies and programs and nonprofits and other education, partners, and even, some community-based organizations that we need to be engaging in this process if we're going to get right to the sustainability and the scalability that we're hoping for in this project. So as we close, could you maybe just identify maybe 2 or 3 people perhaps, or, as we think about the community of practice, that you would think if they're not there, right, then, we're not going to get to where we need to get to. So just a couple examples of who you would invite to the table if you were doing this project with these institutions.
Well, I'm glad to see Danielle Vetter with you, because I would invite her. And then I would think about who are the people you're trying to reach. So if you're doing it regionally, certainly you want to invite the people to the table, not just from the institutions, but from sort of the systems that the institution works with. That's why I like the Appalachian P20 Council. You bring all the partners together. So there's probably not a single person or two to add there, other than maybe some of the groups that support us. So whether it's the AACC, the American Association of Community Colleges, whether it's the Rural Community College Alliance, whether it's the Appalachian colleges, that all over the country, all those groups that support what we're doing and can help tell that story, should definitely be at the table and should be kept informed of this project.
All right. Well, lots to think of and lots of wonderful narrative and conversation. So again, I just want to thank you, John, for being with us today and taking time out. The institution members, they have your information. And like I said, there's a lot of conversation about broadband. So perhaps you will have some pings in your inbox coming up soon. But again, thank you so much for being here, for your time. And we just really appreciate your expertise in leading us to start out the second day of our convening.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And let me just throw in one last pitch. I deal with state and national reporters all over the country, and they're always looking for a good story. So please keep me informed of your work and what you're doing as well. And anytime I can help you tell that story, I'd love to.
Will do. All right. Thank you so much, John. Have a
All right,
wonderful
thank
day.
you.
All right. Bye-bye. All right.